What's keeping you up at night? Hello and welcome to the Bedtime Edit Podcast. I am your host, Alanna McGinn. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that I think is going to be an important listen for a lot of us in midlife. And that is the connection between sleep and mental health. It's Blue Monday, a day coined as the unhappiest day of the year. It's also a day coined by a travel company, so we might not put too much stock into that day. But I think it's important to put stock in how lack of sleep affects mental health, and really it's the cycle. A little bit about how my mental health is going in midlife. I went through basically a 3-year pandemic straight into a divorce. So for 5 years of my life, went through a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And I will say prior to that, I go through anxious moments. I do have some anxiety. I always say I came out of the womb a worrier. I overthink everything. But I was always able to really, take control of issues when issues were at hand. And I felt like I had a good grasp on my own mental health and knew when I needed to do better or, do the right tools when I felt things were maybe going a little off for me. And I never really, and I will say, and again, this is more of not of my disbelief in that it happens, but more in just my naivety, because I never got to that point. I never understood, and I'm saying this wrong, but I never understood how someone could get to the point of not being able to get out of bed, to get to that point where their mental health was so rocked and they were going through so much that it was impossible just to start the day until I went through my divorce. And for 1.5 years of that process, I was living with my ex and my kids. It's not something I recommend, but it is something that, listen, a lot of people going through separation have to go through, for financial reasons and until a financial agreement's put together. And anyways, that's another episode. But there were days, and I will say, going through the stress of that divorce, there were days when I would wake up in the morning before my eyes were even opening, I was crying. And the thought of getting out of bed, I swear I'm not going to cry in every single episode, but I might cry right now. But the thought of getting out of bed seemed impossible. I had 3 teens that I thought, I can't put a smile on my face for these kids again today. It was so hard to put a smile for my team and for my family and for everybody else. Just the thought of, walking on eggshells and dealing with my ex for that day, it seemed impossible. So yes, we're going to be talking about all of this today, not necessarily about my situation, but about how so many women struggle with mental health during their midlife because of their different transitions. It could be menopause. It could be relationship changes, career changes. We go through so many transitions. And my very first guest on the Bedtime Edit, I think, is the perfect person to talk about this. Psychotherapist Carlen Costa. She is also a fellow Women in Media Network podcaster, the Spicy Fat Podcast, which is coming back soon. Carlen, you're my first guest.
Yeah, hi.
This is so exciting.
If you're asleep when you're awake now, that's for sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi.
As I dry my tears.
Yeah, I know. Girl, me too. Don't worry. It's okay. I was like, please don't cry. Please don't cry. You're her first guest. Please don't cry. But also, why not cry? We'll
Right.
get to that. That is actually one of the reasons why I love being in community with women, but also why, women also experience depression and anxiety rates at alarming numbers. And it's one of those big factors, one of those big reasons. And I know we're just kind of jumping into this, listener, but hey, hold on, buckle up. We're going to talk about some things. But, one of those reasons is normalizing the cry, normalizing the feels, normalizing taking up space, emotionally being able to take up space. So girl, cry all you need to, do what you need to.
Oh, there's going to be lots of it. Maybe not all in this episode.
Fair.
But in this podcast, for sure, I'm okay with the crying.
Yeah. Well, so I'm Carlen Costa. I'm a psychotherapist, clinical sexologist, host of the Spicy Fat Podcast here on the Women in Media Network, which hey family, we're sisters now. I'm super happy to be here with you today.
So excited. So excited. Thank you so much. I feel so comfortable interviewing you. So this is great. Okay, let's get to the big question.
Okay.
So I work with a lot of clients in midlife. I speak to a lot of women, a lot of friends, a lot of people around me in midlife. And whether it's that 3 a.m. waking or whether it's just the inability to fall back asleep, why, in your opinion, are so many women in midlife struggling with sleep?
Yeah, that's there's the question, right? So Statistics Canada really maps out 3 different age groups, right? So the 20 to 34 range, the 35 to 49 range, and then 50 to 65, and then, there's another 65 plus, right? And women in every age group struggle with sleep. But when we're looking at especially that kind of like midlife time, that 35 to 49, even 50 to 65, I kind of see that as like a midlife kind of giant chapter for women. There's really like 4 main factors really, or unique pressures to that age group that influence our sleep and our ability to be restful. So things like career challenges. Women at this time, are experiencing burnout, are really taking note of gender-based discrimination, are considering any kind of changes in their career or looking to maybe change or shift in their career. Another kind of factor is also childcare responsibilities or caregiving responsibilities even. This age group is also known as the sandwich generation. So we're not only taking care of our kids, but we're also taking care of our parents or family members that are aging. So everyone is growing and you're kind of the same age from 35 to 65, right? And that applies as you're caregiving for kids and as you're caregiving for, family members. Mental health.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but something that one of my listeners I don't have listeners yet. One of my community
Yes, you do.
sent to me. We start off as most women start off as the default parent. I mean, I think we can safely say that the default parent is kind of a term that's been going around now, and it rings true. And then as our kids get older, they get more dependent, we could start maybe gaining some time for ourselves. But then we go into that sandwich generation of perhaps we have aging parents that we need to now start taking care of. And women are now falling into that default caregiver. And I never really thought of it that way because I'm fortunate where both my parents are healthy. I'm not at that stage yet, but yeah. So yes, that will be a future segment for sure.
I love that. And because that's something that we really need to talk about, like me saying, women age 35 to 60 even, right? 35 to 55, let's say that, right? For that 20-year period, there isn't a lot of change other than, and here's another reason why we may struggle with our sleep, other than like biological vulnerability. So things like hormonal changes, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. What does it mean? What does it look like? How do we treat it? Do we even talk about it enough? I don't think so.
It's a perfect storm of like biological and life changes all
exactly.
At once.
Then you add on relationship challenges, right? That age group 35 to 49 is the highest in divorce rates or separation rates. Add in then mental health struggles on top of that, social isolation because we're dealing with mental health struggles, because we're trying to get ahead in our careers or figure out our career challenges, and caregiving, younger than us, older than us. Girl, of course we can't sleep,
Right? Yeah. So then I know the answer to this too, but I'm excited to have this part of the conversation is we're not sleeping. Yeah. How is that then affecting our mental health?
Yeah. In all the ways. Really. It's, bad sleep is like a toxic ex. Okay. It messes with everything, every aspect of your life. Because when you don't sleep well, your brain doesn't clear out like the trash that it accumulates through the day. It leaves you emotionally frazzled. It leaves you cognitively fuzzy, right? So sleep deprivation and not honoring sleep cycles and what that means for you, right? We also have to talk about that, what a sleep cycle actually means for you, has been linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, or even worsening symptoms of perimenopause and menopause.
Right.
So we have to pay attention to our sleep hygiene. And at the same time, we cannot talk about sleep hygiene in a, like a blanket method. It can't just be like Mark Wahlberg, who wakes up at 4 a.m. and says, if you don't wake up at 4 a.m., you're not successful for the day. Well, Mark, listen, my hormones fluctuate a heck of a lot more than yours do. I don't know what you're taking. I hope nothing. You seem like a nice guy. I'm just saying. But like, my body is doing so many more things than your body is at any given time. So talking about sleep hygiene has to also be with the awareness of what your mental health is. So whether that's anxiety, whether that's depression, but also whether that's neurodivergence as well.
Yes, let's talk a bit about that. You had mentioned that in our notes, and that's interesting to me because I don't know enough about that. So I would love you to speak more on that.
Yeah, so neurodivergence. So neurodivergence is the spectrum of alternate ways that our brains can be, essentially, right? Typically includes ADHD, of which I'm one of the neurospicy women. So I have ADHD for sure. So this is also very important to me. But ADHD, autism, ADHD, autism, and ADHD all mixed together, and then going on to OCD, but then even hitting the branches of anxiety and depression. But neurodivergent people, which is about 20 to 30% of the global population, a majority of which are actually women. Interesting, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. A majority of which are women, struggle with sleep and sleep hygiene in different ways on different levels. Firstly, our circadian rhythm is different than a neurotypical person's. Our circadian rhythm is different. My body naturally wants to stay awake later. Night owls. If you hear of a person being a night owl, more likely than not, they are neurodivergent. Now, that is also a blanket statement. It's general. That doesn't apply to everybody. I know many neurodivergent people, especially women, who are very early risers. But the commonality when we talk about why can't I get to sleep is, neurodivergent and being able to stay up later because our circadian rhythm is different. Then you add sleep sabotage on top of that because we're dopamine seeking, because we're trying to recover from some things, add that on top of that with perimenopause. Oof, it's going to be fun for me the next 20 years is all I'm saying.
And it's interesting that I found there's a higher risk. You had mentioned, different things in this age group in terms of mental health, but there's a higher risk for suicide.
Yes.
Higher risk for suicide in this age range.
Yes. Yeah, there is. There's a higher risk of suicide in this age range. And it is because of all those factors that we discussed, right? We talked about hormonal changes. So entering perimenopause and what that means, menopause, postmenopause, what that means and looks like, looking at relationship challenges, right? A large majority of divorces and separations begin or happen between the ages of 35 to 49. And then being in that kind of sandwich role, right? That sandwich generation, that is a lot of pressure to perform not only as a woman in your job or a leader in your job, or even just to get to your job, right? To perform as, more often than not, a primary caregiver in your home and outside of your home. And then on top of that, your hormones are doing, the salsa every single day, week, and month, that nothing feels consistent.
Well, like parenting teens that are going through puberty themselves.
Yeah, well, and then that, right? You're going into perimenopause, your kids are starting puberty, you're coming into, their own menstrual cycle, and it's just like, oh, there's too many hormones in this house.
What is happening? That is, that stat and that information both shocked me and didn't, because I get it. I know what women are going through at this age. I'm thankful that I feel like our generation now that is going through midlife, there are so many more conversations about it, so much more focus on menopause and perimenopause, which is so important. But again, there are that's what I'm hoping with this podcast, is there are other stories that are happening in this age range that need that community. And I don't know that generations before us really had that. So that I feel is at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and Alanna, when you do this where you're talking about sleep, like I think it's really important to talk to women. Yes, women on average need more sleep than men, just on average, regardless of how your brain presents.
Studies show
it. We know it. So we definitely need more sleep. But also looking at, needing more sleep doesn't necessarily, and please correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't necessarily have to be like consecutive. You know what I mean? Like 10 consecutive hours. So, in my practice, women will come in, they'll be like, I finally fell asleep at like 9 o'clock, but then I was up at like 1. So then I worked until like 4 and then fell asleep again for another 3 hours. And I was like, okay, well, did that equal to 8 to 10 hours? And women more likely are like, yes, or they'll say no because they're judging themselves and being like, well, if I'm awake, I must be awake. Why would I go back to sleep? There's things to get done, right? And looking at sleep as always being accessible and not necessarily like the static experience or event that needs to happen.
Yeah. And listen, that's how our ancestors did it back in the day. It was stage 1 of sleep and stage 2 of sleep. It was never consecutive, 7 to 8 hours throughout the night. But modern technology has kind of forced us into that. And I think we also need to look at, I know this is something that I've taken a lot of focus on as I'm getting older, is just the power of rest. Sleep is one thing, yes, and rest can equal sleep. But just the power of rest, that, there's 7 different stages of rest that we can talk about. But, just to put more rest into your life and not feel that guilt for it. It's okay. Like we said, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel the feels. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to rest. It's okay not to power through all the time. I think there's importance to that too, and is needed and necessary.
Totally. And doom scrolling isn't resting. Sorry, I felt like I needed to say that.
It is not. It is not. Right? And that's something that I know and listen, that is a Band-Aid for a lot. Like when I was going through my divorce, I mean, even knowing what I know, the do's and don'ts, TikTok was my escape. It was and I knew it wasn't a great thing. I knew it wasn't helping my mental health at bedtime. It was something that I needed to change, and I have since. But that was my escape from my own reality, was just consuming other reality to kind of turn off my brain. And many of us are guilty of that, especially when you're going through something major, right? So, okay. So we talked about sleep hygiene. What are some tips that you feel that midlife women can use to improve their sleep?
Okay.
I do too.
Right? Yeah. Like let's talk about tools. Let's talk about things we can do. So the first tip is your mattress right for you?
The best investment you can, the most important piece of furniture in the home.
It really is, right? And I literally just went through this with my partner. We needed to get a new bed. Black Friday, let's do it, and our sleep has dramatically shifted. We're like, oh, okay. This is part of why we've been a little bit grouchy these days, right? We needed a new bed. So definitely like invest in a good bed. Now, the second tip I would say is set a bedtime routine. But what does that mean? Okay? Because routine, when somebody says to me, set a routine, I'm like, yeah, I get excited. And then like my defiant self is like, you set a routine. Like, I'll sleep when I get there. I have things to do. But setting a bedtime routine is less about consistency, even though it is about consistency, but more about kindness. And it is about extending yourself a kindness, because you deserve to have that time. You deserve to have your pre-sleep ritual and your sleep association tools, and get yourself into a way to just actually wind down, whether that's an hour, half an hour, or even 15 minutes.
And I do think that's important to know
Yeah.
is it doesn't have to be this elaborate to do. I mean, I talk a lot about giving yourself an hour before bedtime, and I go through a slow down hour, which I'll explain in later episodes. But I also just think like it could just be 5 or 10 minutes of just focusing on you and allowing that connection between your brain and your body to slow down and sleep. So it doesn't have, because it can be overwhelming. Sometimes they're like, now I have to think of a bedtime routine and now I have to do this. Like, It doesn't have to be anything elaborate.
And that's why I'm big on like sleep association tools, right? Especially as a neurodivergent person, right? So I do have a fan that is on in my bed. I do listen to the exact same playlist every single night with no words. My brain now associates these things with, hey, it's sleep time, So those types of things can help encourage the routine and the delivery of it, along with something like cooling your room down. I used to like not want like a cold room, but now that I think I'm perimenopausal and I don't even know what's happening, to be honest with you. But now that things are going, I'm so hot, like I'm so hot all the time, and I'm just like.
This is the first winter so I have a ceiling fan, and normally it runs for the summer, but by October, November, it's off for the This is the first year where that ceiling fan is still running, and we're like, in January, and it is not getting turned off anytime soon. So I am right, and my dog is like right up beside me, and he's like a little human furnace. And like 2 hours in, I'm like, Zig, you gotta move over. Like I cannot with the heat. Yes.
Yeah, my dog now rolls over to my partner's side.
Well, and that's what I'm doing. I'm shoving him over to him.
I see it.
But yeah, no, regulating temperature is big, especially for us midlife women. 100%.
Absolutely. So temperature, and then I also love looking at what am I ingesting before bed. So ditching the wine. You don't need alcohol before you go to sleep because it messes with your REM sleep. So herbal tea, way better. Having even a tech timeout 30 minutes before bed, right? Blue light is the enemy of melatonin, right? Neurotypical women, make a certain amount of melatonin, but neurodivergent women don't. So it actually is really important to kind of like ban screens or limit screen time, or at least use blue light blockers of some kind before then. And then another thing I like to do is that's when I take my magnesium. So
yes, okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about the M that we like.
Yeah, yes. Magnesium is so important for women, especially in this 35 to 49 age group. It helps relax the muscles, helps calm the nervous system. Study shows that it helps improve sleep quality, right? Some women I see on TikTok are like rubbing it on their bodies and then their skin is falling off. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of like taking a biglycinate pill every night, doubling it up the week before my period and during my period, actually, which is when I need it even the most at that time. And then, hanging out with my magnesium, and it really does help. But being mindful of that, being mindful of when I'm on my cycle, so my sleep hygiene may need to shift and adjust.
100%. Yeah, my I can tell, either the week before or obviously the week during. My sleep is just different, and it's even changing even more now as I'm heading into those perimenopause years. So yeah, you have to be prepared for you know your body. You know when you're going to be going through those hormonal shifts. You likely won't be sleeping as well. You also need to accept that. I think that's important too. And then what do you need to do to better your sleep during that time? So like for you, you're doubling up on your magnesium. For others, it might be changing bedding. It might be making the room more cold, changing what you're sleeping in, changing your bedtime routine. But understand those times when you're just not sleeping as well, which is also normal. It happens. Yeah. Sometimes we just don't sleep well.
Yeah. Whether it's hormonally or even like seasonally, spring, summer, I'm up with the sun.
Yes.
Winter, I'm not. And I tend to be more of a night owl, just naturally.
You hibernate more.
Yeah, just naturally.
Yeah.
So, that's the one thing I dislike about when we talk about like sleep hygiene and routines, is that there doesn't feel like there's any flexibility. And consistency is actually about flexibility, because consistency is about giving yourself what you need, it's about consistently giving yourself what you need, not about consistently giving yourself the same tools.
The same things. Yeah.
Right?
And sleep hygiene is something that we need to take, and it's obviously something that I talk a lot about with my clients and with my programs, and it's important. But if someone is really struggling with sleep, again, their mental health is likely affected. So I always kind of categorize as, sleep hygiene are like lifestyle changes, they're habit changes that we incorporate. But then there's the emotional side of sleep and our emotional relationship that we have with sleep. So what emotional changes would you make to better our mental health alongside of when we're working on our sleep? That's not necessarily sleep hygiene, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Alanna, and the short answer, we can expand it, but the short answer really is, if you're working on your sleep hygiene and all of these things that you're doing doesn't work, then it means you need to go to therapy and deal with your shit. Right? Like that's
I'm a huge proponent for therapy. Yeah.
That is the money right there, right? You can only eat so much magnesium and cool your room down so much, and drink herbal tea as much as you want to, but if your brain continues to ruminate and you're not addressing the actual stressors or the challenges or your emotional body, then it doesn't matter what you do, because your body isn't regulated. Your emotions aren't regulated. And that's what we need to address.
Yeah, therapy saved me during my divorce for sure. Unfortunately, there's only so many sessions that you can do while your benefits cover it. So I know that it's not an option for everybody, right? But it is so important, because working on our cognitive relationship with sleep betters our mental health. It's not always about the temperature in the bedroom and what time you're going to bed at. And it's not always as simple as that, even though sometimes those changes might not feel simple. But working on, like, for me, it was a big thing of just the simple act of learning to let it go. There was so many things I had to learn to let go. Learning I can control how I respond to others. Giving up the want of controlling how others responded to me or how others thought of me. Like, even just how many times are we lying in our bed replaying conversations in our head of what we should have done different? Learning. So like little steps like that can in turn help you sleep better, therefore help your mental health.
Absolutely. And prioritizing joy in that as well.
Oh, yes.
Right?
I love that.
Prioritizing joy. So whether that's dancing, journaling apparently brings some people joy, reading books, right? But like, prioritizing emotional well-being is not just about dealing with your shit, but it's also about putting a light in your life where you also deserve to celebrate where you have let things go, right? Like, just because you have some heavy doesn't mean you don't also have some light,
Yeah.
And
And you don't have to spend a lot of time on it either. A lot of people think by us saying, put joy in your life, it's like, I don't have the money to take a painting class that I want to do, or the time to go dancing, like it could just be, I talk a lot about just like 5 minutes. A 5-minute action is going to motivate you to do more. So what can bring you joy? We can all fit in 5 minutes a day to prioritize ourselves and find joy in some way. As you incorporate that more, you can, increase the time and do more. But yes, I love that you said that, because we need to insert more joy and peace into our lives, however that may be.
Yeah, like, how do we get dopamine? How do we get serotonin? How do we get oxytocin, right? If your body is depleted of those things, all you're going to continue to do is crank up that cortisol, which is going to hit against that melatonin. And like, again, it doesn't matter. But I love that you said that, because financial burden is also a big stressor for people. So it's like you said, how do I find joy? I can't afford the art class. I can't afford the dance class. Cool. Same. Right. But like,
Yeah, exactly.
I can't afford to go to the dollar store and call my girlfriends over, or like even throw on a free YouTube video that is going to walk me through something like a class of some kind, whether it's a dance class or a paint by numbers or a something like that. But also finding joy is also about defining what turns you on, you know? So so many women, I talk to her like, Carlen, I'm not crafty. I'm like, cool, me neither. We try our best, but you know, so my joy isn't necessarily linked to that. My joy is linked to community. My joy is linked to, I love cooking, for example. My joy is linked to reading. My joy is linked to shared intimacy and sex, right? Sex also helps you fall asleep, and so does masturbation. Let's talk about that in a minute. But
that could be another episode that we
yeah, okay, great. But right, but like, what does joy mean? Because I'm tired of hearing everybody say, go take a bubble bath and write a journal. And it's like, that's not it. That's not it for everybody, you know?
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I actually use the same explanation when, you know, obviously when we talk about mental health and we talk about lowering stress. I mean, that's a big thing that I do is, you know, sleep more, stress less. Obviously, the topic of meditation and mindfulness and, you know, mindful breathing comes into play. And what I always like to explain is meditation doesn't necessarily always have to be the act of the, you know, sitting cross-legged in the meditative state. Because for a lot of people, that in itself can be overwhelming. Now I have to learn, like, I don't have time to learn how to meditate. Now I have to learn how to meditate. So for me, my meditation and my way of kind of organizing my thoughts, clearing my mind, which you never fully clear your mind, but just be in a more present state of mind, was walking. I walked before COVID made it cool. Okay. I've been walking since I was a teenager, but that's what works for me. I get the physical activity, but I don't actually even do it for the physical activity. I just enjoy the art of walking. But for someone, as you said, it could be baking, it could be cooking, it could be cleaning your house, it could be organizing a cupboard. You know, what's just going to put you in that more, we could call it joy, or we could call it just peaceful, calm mindset. And again, it doesn't have to take a long time during the day to do it.
No, and the advice, like, you just need to learn how to meditate, is really emotionally inaccurate. That's the word. I was trying to find a different word there, but because like you said, so meditation doesn't actually have to be stillness. Meditation is actually about focus.
Yes.
So when we look at all the different types of brains that exist, is there definitely merit to being able to just clear your mind and sit in silence? Sure, but not everybody's brain can do that. So it's about focus and being able to relate to your thoughts in peaceful ways. That's what kind of stillness really is. So whether that is actually like sitting and meditating and that physical stillness, cool. But ecstatic meditation is one of my favorite ways and most accessible ways for me to meditate. Ecstatic meditation actually can look like you throw on some music really loud and you just move and sway your body like in ways that just actually feel really good for you, which is actually also a form of somatic therapy, which moves through anxieties and things that you're holding on to in your body that you don't necessarily want to be, and moving it through you, right? That's why doom scrolling doesn't work. Doom scrolling just makes your body, your brain busy, but it doesn't actually like move the energy that you need to in your body, and it just keeps it there. Which is why we see as we get older, women, we tend to compartmentalize, but like within ourselves, and then we become like emotional luggage, which is why we have a harder time losing weight, which is why we have a harder time accessing joy, which is why we have a hard time getting to sleep. And it's because we are keeping everything inside of us and then like saying, hey, it's okay, I have PTSD, it's fine, right? Everything's fine. I have anxiety, everything's fine, right? I'm unmanaged, undiagnosed potential neurodivergence. It's fine, right? Everything is fine. No, honey, it's not fine. It's not fine. You are not emotional luggage. Stop carrying things around.
You're right. You're right. Are there any misconceptions or myths that you think around like midlife sleep or mental health in midlife?
Yeah. So if we kind of touched on the one. So the first myth is you need like 8 hours of sleep at once, right? I think quality means more than quantity. So if you're refreshed after 6 or 7 hours, then that's really great. Now, women do need more sleep than men. So we are kind of aiming for that 7, 8, 9 hour kind of stretch, but that doesn't have to be all at once. So normalizing napping, right? Even if it's a quick 20 minutes, normalizing sleeping, getting up, getting some energy out, and then going back to sleep also. I think that's a first good myth to kind of debunk there. Which goes into the second myth, which is midlife means you'll never sleep well again. You know, I think I remember my mom and her friends always talking about like, oh, well, we're menopausal. We're never sleeping again, you know? And hormonal shifts can definitely make sleep trickier. But with the right tools, you can absolutely improve it. So whether that is like a hormonal response or an emotional mental health response as well, you know, and
an environment response too. I think, you know, again, coming back to, this isn't something that I always tell people that I'm not pushing on people to do, but coming back to changing when you know that you're not sleeping well, making certain changes. There's a lot more couples now that are sleeping in separate bedrooms because they want to get better sleep.
Yep.
And unfortunately, you know, it deems the term sleep divorce. So it has this connotation that it's, you know, it's a bad thing for the marriage, but it's just in order to sleep better. And sometimes that alone can help your sleep. And then once you're through the menopause stage and you're sleeping better, you can join up again or not, you know, whatever works for you.
Well, you know what I love about sleeping separate is that you actually get a good night's sleep, because if you're a starfisher like me, right, you're not disturbing your sleep or your partner's sleep. But also what I love about it is that it makes intimacy more intentional, you know, because when you share a bed with your partner, for example, you know, you often get it tossed into that like lazy, like, okay, just like roll over, let's do a quick thing and then like move on. And some mornings, let me tell you, that's the best, right? Some mornings it's all we need. It's all I need, right? But, you know, what that can actually do is start to build some resentment that things aren't intentional, that like intentional connecting isn't happening. So if you're sleeping better, then you have more space to emotionally address things and challenges in your relationship, such as intimacy, such as finances, such as capacity. Right? So sleep and sleeping separate could actually be the answer to having a better sex life.
Yeah. And a better marriage.
Really?
Yeah. Right? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so let's end this. Okay. We're going to have you back because there's so much more that we can talk about for sure. But let's end this on like what would be one, we've talked about so many takeaways, but what would be one key takeaway that you think anyone listening to this could do to better their sleep and therefore their mental health as well?
I think the key takeaway, especially this episode, you know, is that sleep is your superpower, right? That's it. That's like it in a nutshell. Whether it comes to addressing your relationships, friendships, marriages, your kids, whether it comes to your job and being able to function and have capacity and brain power, whether it comes to your intimate lifestyle, whether it comes to your emotional lifestyle, your space, all of that kind of stuff, sleep is your superpower. It's not selfish to prioritize it. It's necessary for you to show up as your best self and allows you to fuel being able to address any challenges or barriers that you handle, especially from a mental health perspective. And it really is the foundation for everything else that you do. So figure out what sleep hygiene means to you and then roll with it, girl, you know?
Love that. Love that and agree wholeheartedly. In my opinion, and again, it's not because it's what I do, but in my opinion, it really is the foundation of all our other pillars of health, for sure. Because when we're not sleeping, we're not really doing anything proper or right? Including bettering our mental health. So thank you, Carlen, for coming on today. Let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah. Hey, okay. So you can find me a few different places. Check out my website, carlencosta.com or spicyfat.com as well if you want to check out the podcast. Hit me up, Instagram, TikTok, sometimes I'm over there, but YouTube, all of the different places. But check out my website and you'll be linked to all the fun things that I'm doing in my life.
Amazing. And all of her contact information will be in this show's notes. And please feel free to follow and subscribe to the Bedtime Edit Podcast wherever you download podcasts. You can also find this episode on thebedtimeedit.com and send me a DM as well on my Instagram at alanna.mcginn. I want to hear your stories. If you are struggling with sleep, mental health issues, and you're in midlife, let's share some stories on another episode. Thanks. Find new episodes of the Bedtime Edit every other Monday. Follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts.